Welcome to Issues of Contemporary Politics with Dr. Brovkin. Today, my dear friends and subscribers and visitors to this channel, I'd like to speak about geopolitics and Armenia. The reason the issue came up is a long-term process, but it came up because yesterday, or the day before yesterday, President Putin spoke in Astana, Kazakhstan, at the summit of Eurasian Economic Union. He had a press conference after they touched on very many interesting questions about Ukraine, about Kaliningrad, and so on. But I found one of the most interesting ones is his detailed treatment of the question of Armenia and it is membership in Eurasian Economic Union. And a possibility of its leaving this organization. And the question that I'd like to pose today, if Armenia makes a choice, will it lead to war? Now, the reason this is so important, and Putin actually pointed it out too, that it all started out the same way. He referred to Ukrainian attempt to apply for associate membership of the European Union in 2014, which led to then a Maidan coup d'etat, and then it led to the decision of Crimea and the Donbas to secede from Ukraine in conjunction with its membership in NATO and the European Union, and the rest of it is history of the war. So this is why I'd like to discuss today this geopolitical context of the coming choice of Armenia. First, a number of basic facts. Armenia is a rather small country. It's a country of only 3 million people. It has no access to the sea, and it's quite poor by modern standards, with its entire GDP of $29 billion. I don't know if it's dollars or euros, but it's approximately close. Now, it has a large diaspora all over the world, but the largest one of all is in Russia. And by various estimates, there is 2 to 3 million Armenians who live in Russia, and a rather large historically based diaspora in France, with the estimates going from 300,000 to 600,000. Now, the context of the current debate should be set in that the European Union leaders gathered in early May in Yerevan, the capital of Armenia, in the context of the European Community discussion of the future of Armenia. And all the leaders of European Union, Macron and von der Leyen and many others were there. And they discussed the future of Armenia in Europe. Even though there were no specific decisions made, it was clear that that von der Leyen, who, as we all know, is very negative about Russia, spoke about Armenia's connectivity with Europe, and specifically it was mentioned in the context of the Caspian corridor. Also, this is where geopolitics come to play. Caspian corridor is essentially a way to create a trade route and a pipeline that would connect trans-Caspian countries, Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan, very rich in natural resources and oil, bypassing Russia. This is the key word, bypassing Russia. Now, Armenia is squeezed between Turkey on the one side and Azerbaijan on the other. Both are quite inimical to Armenia. Azerbaijan in the state of war with Armenia, and so the only thing that makes this corridor possible is if Armenia was on board, and then one could connect from Europe through Turkey to Armenia, Azerbaijan, across the Caspian to Central Asia. So strategically, it's tremendously important for the West and for European Union if Armenia was in fact on board in whichever capacity. So on the 7th of June there will be elections in Armenia, and we shall see what the outcome would be. If Pashinyan is elected again, then the course is clear. It would be preparations for the European application. Now, according to Armenia's constitution, before the application for European Union, there must be a referendum. Now, if they observe the constitution, which is not guaranteed, but if they do, then the Armenian people would have to vote. Now, there it's quite interesting and important to see who is going to vote, whether the Armenian passport holders in Russia will be allowed to vote, or the ones that live in France, whether they would be allowed to vote. But in any case, this would be an extremely important referendum if it takes place, and we shall see. Now, those who argue for, pro, the application for the associate membership as a first step and then full membership argue that it would have, and this is the most attractive proposition for the current residents in Armenia, they would have a visa-free entry into the European Union, which of course generates great enthusiasm in Armenia, because that would mean, presumably, that they would be able to go to study and work in the European Union. That's number one. Number two is the promised investment. And von der Leyen in Yerevan has mentioned that the Europeans would raise $2.5 billion of investment in the coming months, a year or so. And then, of course, there was talk about security, that the European Union would provide security. I don't know how, because they're not present anywhere in the neighborhood, as Turkey is not a member of the European Union but of NATO, and is not very sympathetic to Armenian cause. Finally, there would be direct connection on family lines of the French diaspora to Armenia. Now, in his remarks concerning Armenia, Putin explained, I think, in great detail, more than he has ever spoken on that topic. Again, why Russia, what is Russia's position on Armenia's theoretical possible future association with the European Union. To my surprise, he said Russia had no objections, as long as this was the legitimate choice of the Armenian people. He put it in very nice ways, saying that there were links, cultural, historical links of Russia and Armenia for centuries, and that whatever is best for Armenia is just fine for Russia. This is the way he put it. However, he said, and this is the important and interesting part, he said they, meaning Armenians, have to calculate what it actually will cost. And here are some important numbers that come to play. Armenia's export right now is about 50% to Eurasian Economic Community, which includes Russia, Kazakhstan, Belarus, Kyrgyzstan. And just about 38% goes directly to Russia, and that is tax-free, which is open border, which is tax-free trade. Now, most of it is agricultural, and it has a huge Russian market because Russia is a northern country and it does need a lot of fruits and vegetables and wine. And these are the major staples of Armenian exports. And then Putin said, what are they going to do with all this wine when and if they have to pay dues to enter the Russian market? Once the European Association comes into force, they would have to pay normal dues to like any other non-member. In other words, they would lose a preferential status in their exports to Russia. Exactly the same argument as was used when they discussed Ukrainian membership in European Union. And of course, they would also lose preferential treatment in Russian energy. They buy it now at the same cost as Russian entities. No tax, domestic prices, which are several times lower than the world prices. And Putin said if they leave Eurasian Economic Union, they would have to pay world prices. Now, Armenia is a landlocked country, has no port, and has no resources. So they would have to buy energy from whatever source they want, but paying world prices. Now, as I mentioned before, the total Armenian exports are $8 billion, and of those, $4 billion go to Russia. So roughly about Russia and its associates, members. Roughly half of it goes to Russia and Eurasian Union. Now, the third factor is that of investment. Putin quoted the figure of 4 billion that was direct Russian investment, which is slightly less than double that of what Madame von der Leyen promised to raise 2.5 billion. So Putin's reasoning is that they were better off in terms of investment into their infrastructure when they were, or they still are, members in the Eurasian Economic Union. Now, the most interesting issue, which is not publicly discussed, which I do when I did a video on the past and present and future of the Baltic countries, what I discovered, and this is a kind of a rule that can be applied to just about any East European country that joined European Union at one point or another, but is particularly seen vividly in the case of the Baltic countries. And that is a simple fact that young people leave in search of education and jobs. And it is the mid-level and older people, and by older people I mean people who have no children. So after 40 people usually don't have children, and they are the ones who stay. And they are the ones who will eventually die. And that leads to a serious demographic problem. By some calculations, I read that by the year 2050, Lithuania may cease to exist altogether, because it's a similar country to Armenia in that its population is 3 million people. Or Latvia, 2.5 million people, Estonia, 1.5 million people. They're all very similar. They're small, and they took a orientation towards the European Union. Well, that's what is happening, and that is the labor force is decreasing. And even though they do have some breakthroughs in high tech, such as Estonia, most of them are still recipients of Western commodities. And the overall picture is not so bright when you consider brain drain and the young people quitting their native lands. So this is particularly a serious problem for Armenia, which already has more Armenians living in Russia than in Armenia itself. But I think for our purposes, the most important issue is the geopolitics and the strategic issue. Putin put it very politely that if it is a matter of economic orientation and trade, let Armenians make their choice. But he warned it should not take the path of Ukraine. In other words, if the European Union introduces any kind of military aspects, of military presence in Armenia, that would turn the page and that would cause a totally different Russian response. Because of its central strategic importance in the north-south connection of Russia and Iran, and on the other end east-west connectivity, which if realized by the European Union would make it possible for Caspian nations to export their commodities and oil bypassing Russia, which again would run into, I suppose, Russian resistance. This is why these issues are so important, and we shall see how they would resolve in the coming months. Thank you very much, and I hope you would put a like if you do my channel and subscribe. And also I invite you to read my book, A History of Russia, which is called From Vladimir Lenin to Vladimir Putin, and the reference is in the description. Goodbye.